I'm Carol Gallo, Executive Director of the YC Ho Helen and Michael Chang Foundation. I'm also an Exponent Philanthropy Board member, and I serve on the Programs and Services Committee. I'm delighted to introduce this selection of member spotlights. You're about to see 6 short videos that focus on equity. The speakers will share lessons learned from their own equity journeys, using strategies such as going beyond the grant, building learning communities, volunteer engagement, and more. The speakers will be in the chat to answer your questions and look forward to connecting with you in the video after chat. Enjoy!
Hello, my name is David Greco, and I'm the Executive Director of All Stars Helping Kids. All Stars Helping Kids focuses on investing in early stage and emerging nonprofit organizations that have innovative approaches to helping disrupt the cycle of poverty for disadvantaged youth here in the Bay Area. Now, the grantees and our nonprofit partners are working in some of the hardest hit, most low-income communities across the Bay Area. And one thing that we know from working in all of these communities is that those organizations that are on the front lines of fighting for racial equity and social justice need a lot more than just money in order to achieve impact. Now, don't get me wrong. I'll be the first one to admit, no money, no mission. But in addition to that, funders need to go beyond the grant if they really want to advance issues such as racial equity, economic mobility, and social justice. At All Stars, we use an approach that we call the 4 C's. This is cash grants. We provide 3 years of general operating support to all of our grantees. In addition, we have capacity building. We do quarterly trainings on topics ranging from budgeting to fundraising to board governance to measuring your impact and outcomes. Then we also provide connection. We connect our grantees to other funding networks, to funding partners, to peer networks, so that they can meet and grow their donor base, their funding base, as well as their own professional networks. And last is coaching. We provide what we call strategic advisors. These are subject matter experts and leaders in the field who volunteer their time to work with our grantees on strategic issues that their organization is trying to achieve. And so when we combine all of these pieces, what we really often talk about for funders is how can you also go beyond the grant? Like many of the other Exponent members, we are not a large endowed foundation, right? We're not the Gates Foundation, we're not the Ford Foundation. We don't have those types of resources. So how can we really leverage what resources we bring is that we bring everything that we can. Our founder, Ronnie Lott, if you sat in on his plenary earlier today, he talked about exhausting every moment and trying to find every way possible that we can support our organizations. For example, when COVID struck, and here in California, we had already set up a rapid response fund 3 days before the state issued its stay-at-home orders. And within a couple of weeks, we had the first set of working capital grants out to our grantees. This was money just to help them keep the doors open and the lights on. That's what we really wanted to do. And when I was talking to our co-founder, Karen Lott, and I said, you know, who should we be helping and supporting? She said, first, we need to take care of our family. And so all of our past grantees, all of our alumni groups, we opened up the funding to all of those organizations that had received funding from All Stars. And in addition, we set up what we called a help desk. We brought in experts to help our grantees navigate through the PPP loan process and applying to the Small Business Administration relief grants. None of these organizations had often gone through that process. And 13 of our organizations ended up getting PPP loans and allowing them to actually not only just keep their doors open and keep the lights on, but they actually finished the year in the black. Remarkable accomplishment. For our grantees, one of the things that we know, every time we've gone out and asked them, you know, what works with this program? What would you like to see improved? What strengthened? Now, all of them say, you know, we're grateful, multi-year general operating support. You may oftentimes been their first, multi-support funder, first general operating support funder. But what they say time and time again, it's really all of the other work. It's that having somebody to be able to call and talk to and work through an issue, to be able to get a strategic advisor to help them, to learn from their other grantees and their cohorts about challenges that they may all be facing jointly. It's really those items that groups feel that is the difference in helping them accelerate beyond where they came into the program. And the results, in many ways, if you look, our results speak for themselves. We track organizations and measure how much have their revenue increased. And their revenue increase is almost 400% from when they start the program to afterwards. They grew, they've added staff, they expanded programs and services, and most importantly for us, they serve more youth. So we're seeing the outcome and impact out in our communities, even though as a lean funder, small staffed, small budget organization, we don't have just the pure dollars to go out and move the needle on an issue. So it's this beyond the grant approach, our 4 C's, that really helps to deliver the outcomes and impact that we are looking for as a foundation, as a grant maker, as a member of this community. So please, if you want to learn more, go visit our website, allstarshelpingkids.org, or you can reach out to me directly, and I'd love to engage you. Thank you very much. Take care.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jenny Riley, Executive Director of the RX Foundation. And in this 10-minute session, I'm going to share with you just a little bit about why and how we convened a learning community of our grant partners for the first time. You'll also hear directly from several of those grant partners about their experience in the learning community. And please stay with us until the end when those grant partners will share some advice they have for funders like you and I about how we can do better and build learning communities that really add value to their work. In 2019, the RX Foundation launched a brand new grant program focused on building capacity for health advocacy across the United States. This year, we have 16 organizational partners working in 12 states to build capacity for advocacy. When we launched this program, we decided to convene a learning community of our grant partners focused on advocacy for 2 reasons. First, to encourage learning and sharing and cross-pollination among these groups. And second, so that we would have a forum for providing additional kinds of technical assistance and support to these advocacy groups as their grants moved forward. Our advocacy partners learning community has 3 main components. The first is quarterly Zoom meetings where we all come together to learn and share. The second is an online home for sharing resources and information, and we use Basecamp. The third is funding for additional technical assistance opportunities offered to our grant partners learning community throughout the year. I'm going to focus on those first 2 pieces today, but please do reach out to me if you'd like to know more about the technical assistance piece of our learning community. Here is what a few of our advocacy partners have to say about their experience in the learning community meetings.
I think the most helpful part of the learning community for our organization and for our staff has been the learning community calls or webinars where someone tends to present for 10 or 20 minutes and then the group gets to discuss a particular topic.
I think for us, a big value add for this learning community has been hearing directly from partners. It's been really beneficial for us to learn about different platforms or organizing methods that various partners have used, and from presentations and conversations that are really grounded in specific examples and campaigns.
So what has really been useful in the community, the RX Foundation advocates community, is the sharing of information. The sharing of the different projects folks are working on and the resources that people have access to that they've used that they can recommend.
Some of the things that have been most useful to us at People's Action from the cohort has been getting us outside of the bubble of people that we ordinarily interact with, because we all have the organizations that we relate to that are like our typical coalition partners and all that, but this has created an opportunity for us to connect with people who are doing similar enough work that we can learn from each other, but different enough work that they're not the people we talk to all the time and have some different perspectives.
In addition to building community on these quarterly calls, we've also been really intentional about fostering community among these grant partners between those calls.
You know, when we go on to Basecamp and see what other organizations doing similar work to us, you know, we're a very small organization. When we can get inspiration from other organizations in this community, it's actually really valuable to us. It saves us a lot of time. It saves us, you know, frankly, money, because we know we can learn what works, what doesn't work, where we should go, what's trending in the states around us, and how our state fits into that.
The thing that I've really liked has been Basecamp. You know, we're always at Communicalis, we're always looking for opportunities to create two-way communications where partners can interact with one another and share updates and resources, as opposed to just, you know, the funder sending out updates and whatnot. So I think it allows for a more interactive and dynamic experience.
One example I was thinking about was there was a presentation from an organization in Maine that had done some research about, like, they're doing some research, and that research turned out to be like some really useful messaging points around like how to reach different populations, and that changed the way that I think about how we communicate with our target audience, actually.
It's been exciting to see the impact this learning community has had on our advocacy grant partners. They've inspired each other, taken action, and genuinely supported each other as a result of this community.
For example, there was a Medicaid 101 slide deck that was shared, and we're actually going to use parts of that because Medicaid is different in every state, but we're going to use parts of that for a training that we're going to be doing with our coalition here in Connecticut.
2 of our staff, including me, were able to join the optional vaccine call, which was just sort of talking about vaccine access and rollout and what groups we're doing to increase that access. And we're a nonprofit law center. Of course, we were encouraging people to get the vaccine, and, you know, encouraging our clients and Black Lung Association members to, you know, have the right information and get out there. But that call with all these other groups who are talking about creative ways to reach their communities really sort of tipped us over the edge of actually hosting a vaccine clinic with a local health clinics. We were encouraged by that call to leverage our relationships in the community and be there at one of the clinics that was pretty central, and just tried to like really sort of more formally support the vaccine efforts, which we were thinking about, but I'm not sure we really would have actually done it without that call. So it was really encouraging.
The beautiful thing was we were able to call on this community and say, has anybody done this? We could use it in our own advocacy if you have. And we got immediate responses. We were able to ask the community, and the community came back to us and helped us that way. That saved us, I mean, I would say a week's worth of staff work.
In addition to the impact that this learning community has had on our grant partners, it has also impacted the work of the RX Foundation directly. Perhaps the best example of that are the vaccine equity grants that we rolled out earlier this year. When the RX Foundation wanted to deploy grant funds to support community-based vaccination efforts, we turned to our partners in this learning community and asked them to tell us who in their states or regions was doing the critical on-the-ground work. Based on the trust that we've built in this community, we acted on those recommendations. And to date, we've deployed more than $225,000 in vaccine equity grants across 7 states. I hope after what you've heard today, you're feeling ready to think creatively about why and how to bring your grant partners together. I asked our grant partners what advice they would give other funders who are thinking about putting together a learning community like the RX Foundation did. Here's what they had to say.
The most compelling part to me is when the funders are very intentional and reflective about not creating a space that feels competitive or feels hierarchical. Grantees really do feel the power dynamics in the room, And I think it takes an intentional person actually prioritizing learning and making it a space where people can ask questions, even if the board members are there, even if, you know, they're not sure what the answer is. So I think it just takes a level of intentionality and making people feel like they're not, you know, at risk of losing funding for not knowing.
I have been to several meetings, and the faces that have been at the meetings are not as diverse as we would like them to be, as I would like them to be. So bringing more diversity and bringing funding opportunities to people that are closer to the issues, the trusted messengers and the people that are on the ground doing the actual work.
I mean, I just really appreciate the like advanced planning that is involved in what y'all do. You know, we get plenty of notice before anything, and that really helps us to be able to engage meaningfully and giving us the opportunity to engage in things based on what we feel like we need, as opposed to like, here's a training opportunity that we want all of our grantees to participate in.
And I think a key piece to this is just being flexible and making sure that what you are doing is adapting to the particular needs of the community, of the groups that you're working with. It's, you know, about modifying technical assistance or coaching or frequency of these calls, or how you're interacting with them in between the different calls to what they find most helpful.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Allen. I live just outside Portland, Oregon in a town called Milwaukee. I'm a program officer and I'm director of learning and community engagement for the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, which primarily supports arts and K-12 education throughout the state. Miller Foundation has always supported rural Oregon since its inception. Because we have a statewide mission, we have to support rural orgs in order to realize our vision for the state. Is really, we're just a small staff foundation, and Oregon is a really big state. Let's get out to the, you know, to the rural areas and state. Let's develop relationships there, learn about those communities so that we can evaluate how our funding programs fit or don't fit with the needs of those communities.
Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Gabriela, and I am the Hudson Valley Program Coordinator here at North Star Fund. And what brings me to the work is my experience working with farm workers and children of farm workers in upstate New York, in the Hudson Valley and Western New York for many years. And also my personal experience of having been undocumented and doing a lot of organizing around immigrant rights. And I'm very happy now to be at North Star Fund and think about grant making in the Hudson Valley. Organizing in the Hudson Valley and in rural settings looks very different than organizing in New York City. And so we wanted to be a champion of that work. We wanted to support that work. And there's a huge track record in the Hudson Valley of a lot of different groups being able to build a strong base of community members that understand their power and their voice in this like political world that we live in, and understand how they can use that voice to bring about change. And that is only able to happen because we have a lot of nonprofit organizations who are throwing themselves into, you know, political education, into leadership development, into building community, even though it's very isolating. There's no infrastructure to build the leadership of new leaders to the extent that we would like to. And part of that is lack of funding, right? And the lack of funding is due to the fact that many foundations don't really understand how community organizing looks in rural areas, and it looks differently.
Meg O'Connell, so the executive director of the Allen Family Foundation, which is a place-based foundation in central New York. We focus on 2 counties, Onondaga and Cayuga County. So we've been around for 65 plus years. The hardest challenge is as a funder in rural communities is really that you don't have the infrastructure that you have in more urban settings. You really just don't have the not-for-profits. You don't have the sophistication of not-for-profits. You have really all the challenges related to just a scattered people, scattered organizations, and it's just geographically very challenging to serve. You do the work very differently in rural communities than you do in urban communities.
Hello, everyone, wherever you may be. Happy to be here with you. My name is Jaime Arredondo. You see him pronouns, and I'm an immigrant from the state of Michoacan, Mexico. And I've been living in this country in Oregon for 31 years now. So I've seen a lot of change in those 3 decades. I work for an organization called the Capaces Leadership Institute, which I've been involved with most of my life. We work primarily in rural communities of the Oregon's Mid-Willamette region, which is very, very agriculture, but has changed a lot in terms of demographics over the last, several decades. Many funders, both family foundations, large foundations, that have begun to kind of recognize, the important work of rural organizations and centering, equity in that work. But there's a lot of work to be done still, absolutely.
The power of that connection and introductions is really great to bridge that divide that Jaime talked about, which is the community with needs and solutions, and the in philanthropy we have the assets to help support those solutions, and we can help make those connections too in philanthropy.
Any of the work that we do in rural areas is very much in partnership, even more so than in the city, with our public partners, partly because they have the most access to resources in these communities. And our goal has always been to get them to think a little bit more innovatively, more equitably, more inclusively, and to just kind of think outside the box. It's much more of a challenge, let's just say that, to further the racial equity in some of the rural communities that we work at. And yet, I think that is one of the things as a foundation that is predominantly white. It's a family that has that ability because of the power and influence that we have had for many generations, that we feel really called to be able to do that work. If we're not going to do that work and call out that work, then it's not going to be a safe space for other people to be able to do that. So as a funder in those areas of elevating and bringing out these conversations, you have to do it publicly, but then you also have to do it privately.
The way we talked about our grant making and the kinds of programs we supported, the language didn't necessarily resonate with rural communities or rural organizations. They might read a description of our grant making program and not recognize their work in that.
I would say go to community.
Literally showing up in town and just sitting down and listening.
Being a part of our work, coming to our spaces, or in this case, virtual, I guess, but also, telling the story to others as well. You can advocate, for your communities, so that there's a greater impact being made. And
we have a committee in New York City and also the Hudson Valley that inform our grant making, strategy, that inform which groups should we be funding and why, and they really are rooted into what is community organizing and are often always given a voice on how it looks in rural communities. And so we follow their lead and their recommendations, and it's a really awesome part of what we do.
In rural communities is also really understand what's going on in rural communities. The easiest thing is just to put up a grant application and have people apply, right? And I think that can be impactful. But I think if you want to be even more impactful, it really is going to the community and to try and really find out what's going on in a community and what their perceived needs are.
I think, this is a gut check moment for all of us, in philanthropy, that, we need to continue to let go, that we need to continue to trust community. We need to continue to be comfortable with uncertainty. And I know it's hard, it's hard. At the end of the day, community knows what's best for them. They have the answers to their problems, to the opportunities. And, how do we shift as much as possible to follow that lead.
Rural strategies, more than any other, really will benefit from funders taking on trust-based practices. Jaime said, I think his language was sort of, okay, funders, you have to let go. You really have to trust that rural communities have the solutions.
In the fact that organizing looks different in rural communities, and how then are we going to be flexible enough to believe in the overall vision that these groups might have for a particular region, and really throw ourselves into supporting them and listening.
What speaks the most is like, where is your money going to, what does that look like for you at the end of your year, right? How many are rural organizations? How many are organizations that are centered in equity, that are working, intersectionally with other groups, right, that are being affected? That's going to speak the most, not the fact that you have, you need to support work, you have in your mission statement or, and your values that you need to support rural communities. And money speaks.
Money speaks. We didn't spend a lot of time developing a rural strategy. Developing a narrative around why and what we were going to do. We really just think that our values live in our practices and in our funding.
And instead of asking groups to change, why don't we look at ourselves and see how we can be more flexible, have more of a transparent process, and really just a participatory process that we're involved with.
There's that motto: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. And I see that more in rural communities than ever. It takes a long time for people, and you have to just have the long-term horizon, but you have to keep chipping away at it and keep bringing people along.
It doesn't have to be very dreamy. These are things that we can actually change in the philanthropic sector to support grassroots organizations to bring about change.
Healthy Communities Foundation is a health conversion foundation, and our mission is to measurably improve the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities that are both in the city of Chicago and its surrounding western suburbs.
And our role as a foundation is to ensure that the allocation of resources are really targeted towards the community that helped to establish the foundation. That means really taking a broad approach to what health equity is in the region.
Our region is a very diverse area. We have one of the largest Latino communities in the country. We also have a large Black population that is quickly shifting to the western suburbs. We also have the largest Palestinian American community within our region.
Our equity journey really began about 5 years ago in 2017 when a new board was appointed to lead our foundation. That board was representative of our region and had experience across the social determinants of health.
We had a study commissioned to look at the connection of race and health.
One of the biggest aha moments for us as a foundation was looking at the various indicators along health, so housing and insecurity and chronic disease, and realizing that whatever map we looked at, every map across our region looked exactly the same.
And what the strategic planning process did, and bringing on new people, helped us to orient ourselves towards the community that we serve, the populations there, and first of all, where's the most need and where could it have the most effect? That is about equity. Where can the dollars go to best help improve those people's lives?
As the foundation was revamped, that paved the way for the foundation to center on the importance of being engaged in community, but also being community-led.
When we began this journey, we understood the importance of listening to our community partners, gathering data, and working from a hyper-local perspective. And if anything, COVID-19 has affirmed our approach.
That focus that we had in the strategic planning sessions on that emphasis was done well in advance of the pandemic. So we were in some ways well positioned to address the needs that the pandemic ended up just amplifying.
Specifically, our region had amongst the highest ranking zip codes in Illinois for COVID-19 infections and mortalities, unemployment, and housing insecurity.
And so we knew that those communities were not only going to need more support, but going forward for the recovery, it was going to be an even larger hurdle to overcome.
When the pandemic hit in March 2020, within a few days, we were already in conversation with 20, 30 of our grantee partners.
We checked in as frequently as it made sense for our partners based on their capacity and our familiarity with the data and our community's evolving needs.
We were hearing on the ground was families were being sick, people could not show up to work, and that wasn't necessarily being reflected in the data.
All of this was no surprise to our board.
We really wanted to step up, and we decided to significantly increase our funding way beyond what had been in previous years, just given the crisis at hand.
It started to really emphasize the need to get dollars to organizations that weren't just about responding in the moment to pandemic concerns, but the longer term needs of those people.
We realized that it was an absolutely critical time for us as a foundation to begin shifting to a trust-based approach.
Trust-based philanthropy is the way we practice community-centered philanthropy. That means we are constantly asking ourselves how we might operate differently so that the people and organizations doing the work are at the heart of every decision we make.
Being led by community allowed us to hold parallel conversations with community on one side and also show up to collaborative tables with public health departments and other funders.
So we have leaned on our role as a bridge between community and philanthropy to amplify our community's voice and expertise in their own experience.
It allows us to really step into our power as a foundation in order to advocate for our grantee partners.
Because of the trust that we were able to build during a crisis, when we lead with questions about how are you doing as an individual and what do you need, I think that it allowed for a lot of leaders to really step back and assess, like, how am I doing? They can actually be very honest about what the pain points are and where they're struggling.
We understand that those closest to the issues really do have the best understanding of not only the issue, but also the solutions.
So we went out and gathered information and prepared a report that covered community insight from our grantees about how we can best assist them long term.
What's important about that report is everything that we heard, we were able to kind of take action on what we heard. We don't kind of engage in conversation just for the sake of data collection, knowledge gathering, curiosity. We're asking questions to build strategies to do things to address the things that we heard.
In order for us to truly support the capacity and ecosystem of nonprofits in our region, we really needed to trust that they knew best what their community needed.
And we come to this work with an orientation towards equity and justice, committed to aligning our internal policies and practices with the kind of external impact we seek, which ultimately is about people being healthy, resilient, and thriving.
We as a foundation wanted to align our trust-making approach to not just be centered on the relationship building, but for that to translate into our grant-making approach and process.
General operating support allowed organizations to move quickly to respond to things that they found that were emerging in their community of practice.
We also know how important it is to have long-term investments. We didn't get into these systemic inequities overnight. It will take years to come out of this.
I have to say, it was our board pushing us to think bigger, to think bolder. And so our board has exemplified what it means to trust the expertise of the staff.
We have invested in a staff that has connections to or trust reinforced relationships with community leaders, community entities in the communities we are seeking to serve.
It helps that we as individuals come to this work with extensive experience in the nonprofit sector, it helps that many of us have longstanding ties in the neighborhoods and communities we serve.
The advice I would provide, it takes one step, and that first step begins with community-informed data.
And the pandemic has shown us that data doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, but it's a really good way to begin a process of asking questions.
We have to iterate every day. And if we are not transforming our practices every day to better meet the community's needs, we're not doing our work well.
So until the stakes change for all of us, there's always more that we could do.
Really get a sense of where the pandemic has most impacted communities. And through that lens, you really get to a place of looking at the systemic implications of racism.
This work is about changing hearts and minds, but it's also about orienting our systems and organizations towards equity and justice.
We don't want to forget what this pandemic has taught us. We need to keep the resources flowing, even when the spotlight of the pandemic is off.
Our journey is constantly evolving, and every year seems like such a complete different year in terms of what we've learned.
Advancing health equity in our region means strengthening our partnerships. It means learning from our partners. This work is a co-creation process.
We always come back to one central thread, and that's recognizing how our communities are at the heart of everything we do.
You know, the Blueprint is really a unique initiative, and Silicon Valley is a place with so much wealth, so much innovation, so much investment, and yet the nonprofit sector, the Latinx and BIPOC nonprofit sector, continues to struggle and be under-resourced. And the investments from Silicon Valley studies show the Latinx and BIPOC nonprofit sector has been neglected by philanthropy. And as a result, our Latinx nonprofit sector really continues to struggle, and our Latinx community, and everything from education and economic security to the digital divide right in the heart of Silicon Valley.
It's a pretty exciting story because for years our focus has been in this geographical county and in working with Latino-led, Latino-based organizations. And we started having internal discussions about what more could we do beyond grant making to really make a mark on the field of philanthropy.
What I found as learning in the last 6 or 7 years, we trustees with foundations, with principals, have a lot of power. So how can I build a practice as a philanthropist where I'm sharing power and stepping down from that power and handing that decision making over to the community? The grantees know what's best for the grantees.
It comes down to empowerment. I think it comes down to allowing people to acknowledge their full capabilities, and for us allowing them to have the space to execute those capabilities.
We have worked very hard to get at the table with some of these foundations and to lift up our cause.
Many of my colleagues that also run smaller nonprofits have had some of the same challenges of not having access to capital like other people do. I think that that's one of the things the Castellano Family Foundation is doing with this Blueprint for Change report. It's to really giving some very specific examples and areas where philanthropy should focus.
El tener oportunidades como un fondo de ayuda para organizaciones que son culturalmente específicas es muy importante porque no hay. Siempre estamos compitiendo con una gran mayoría que ya ha estado establecida y que ya hay una cultura de o que ya hay un sistema donde es como continuar con lo mismo. Y yo creo que es importante interrumpir eso y crear un nuevo orden.
We can change an outcome for a group of people or individual's person's life. Obviously, that is a great thing. If we really want to push the needle, we have to work together. We have to come together as a movement. And that is when we're going to see the widespread systemic change that we're constantly advocating for.
The way that can be is by listening to the community itself and making sure that the investment is going to where the community is saying it needs to be invested.
The Latinx community has been impacted by systemic racism and policies that have created some of these inequities. If we want to see the region grow, our economy to thrive, we do need to address the inequities. We know that Silicon Valley has benefited for years, like the report says, from a robust Latinx labor force, small business development, and a growing purchasing power. So it's only fair that if the Valley is benefiting from our community, that we find a way to not leave the community behind.
Yo creo que la importancia de estos fondos es precisamente eso, que ayudan a las organizaciones o que va a ayudar a organizaciones como Teatro Provisión a fortalecer aún más los cimientos para que podamos seguir creciendo.
Our young people, our families are worthy of investment, and it has taken allies in philanthropy to work alongside us and in partnership to lift up and amplify that message that philanthropy can support communities of color and really make the changes for a more racially just and equitable society is by investing in communities and Latinx organizations that are working deeply and hand in hand in mutuality with community.
And it's part of the Foundation of Families DNA to engage with community, we are part of community. We have earned their trust and respect, which created a great foundation for us to go to them and say, we want to hear from you. We need you to tell us what are the challenges, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities.
I am incredibly grateful to the Castellano Family Foundation for their vision of supporting Latinx leaders like myself and many others for so many years because they have not only provided an investment in our work, but they've also opened doors for us. And I think that is really critical when you're talking about philanthropy. If you don't have access to those donors, it is really difficult for someone like myself to have access to those resources.
So it's really critical that we elevate the nonprofit sector to give them the voice, and it's really the voice of the communities, and they can really best bring those issues forward and also design the changes that will have the greatest impact in their communities.
Essentially, the highlights, which are the same highlights for all BIPOC leaders, but we're highlighting Latinos, the lack of access to philanthropy, that's what grantees are saying they don't have. Health and wellness of staff is very high on it. Leadership development of Latinos, general operations support. We all know that BIPOC-led nonprofits are especially susceptible to these inequities. And I'm just so happy to have a blueprint and a partnership with regional Latino-led nonprofits to get this information out to philanthropy at large.
It is a blueprint for change and a call to action. So the recommendations are very concrete. So someone in philanthropy could literally open up the pages of the blueprint and go through all the findings, and they could find solid suggestions and recommendations that they could implement now.
It's been so important and valuable to have a philanthropic partner in listening and championing those causes that we're lifting up. That is how I think we can really change the way philanthropy is responding to communities and investing in bold ideas, progressive responses, in power building and organizing by using the Castellano Family Foundation's model of working in trust with organizations like the Youth Alliance and other Latinx organizations, because that trust is what is going to help propel change and propel what we're all after, which is supporting our young people and our families to thrive, having communities that are equitable and racially just. The way that the Castellano Family Foundation has approached the work is something that I hope can be replicated across the philanthropic sector.
The blueprint call to action has monetary goals. $50 million over 5 years. That's investment from all sectors of the community. with philanthropy taking the lead. And then now the blueprint has led to specific initiatives that we're getting ready to launch, one of which is a staff wellness grant program, which the grantees again talked a lot about how their frontline staff is really taxed, is really suffering from secondary trauma. And then, of course, launching the Latin Excel Fund, which will collect contributions from philanthropy that can be targeted investments in the Latino community. And then we will continue to fundraise. Our board, our trustees are very active as our partners, Silicon Valley Community Foundation and other foundations that are coming on board as partners. So again, we envisioned that we couldn't do this alone, but we could be the catalyst, and we just expect that to grow.
It's super amazing to see that we do have the ability to lift up one another and really show each other that we are the pinnacles of change. We are part of this movement together.
Yo creo que ahí está el futuro de la filantropía, el poder tener en cuenta la voz de las organizaciones que forman este tejido en la sociedad y que sostienen también a las comunidades.
I don't believe it's one investment. I believe this should be more of a movement, and hopefully other communities around the country really learn from what's happening here, and specifically around supporting Latinx organizations and the Latinx leaders, so that they do the same thing in other communities as well.
When I started thinking about the breakdown that we face in our communities now, with isolation and polarization and fear and distrust, and we're going to set equity as the goal. I'm thinking, is equity the goal, or is it the byproduct of communities of people who volunteer their energy coming together? And if I'm coming as a volunteer, I oftentimes don't, I bring my love of the mission first.
Yes, that's right.
And so when people come together around a common mission, then healthy communities are formed because of their common interest, not because of their common enemy.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what we're seeing now. So if we go after how do we push people to have common interests and include all their brothers and sisters, or how do we invite them to come into those arenas where they are so passionate about the mission that needs to be accomplished, that they come in and look first at the mission, not at the color or the status or the whatever.
Yeah, I like where you're going with this, Jane. The way I think about it is first around establishing a shared understanding. In so many spaces, we use language and have different definitions for it. we think about concepts and have different ways of making sense of those things, right? But at the core of it is what you described. A lack of connection contributes to everything that our relationship produces. And so if we prioritize relationship, which is a part of that cultural emphasis that I talked about, if I have an appreciation, for example, of your faith background, of the rituals that make up your routines on a daily basis, your values and beliefs around critical aspects of society and the things that matter most to all of us as contributors to this social system, right? It's Americans. as people who are contributing to, I think, the ultimate experiment in democracy. Right? I'm going big with it, Jane, but at its core, equity is really about appreciating where the distinctions exist, the disparities between individual experiences and group experiences. And so in the same context that you talked about, a focus on the things that help us stimulate or activate around our passion. If we do that with an eye toward the disparities between individual and group experiences, now we're addressing those disparities in a way that is actually not, it's not emphasizing the difference as much as it is emphasizing what we have in common, with an eye toward always paying attention and being sensitive and increasing our awareness and responding to and committing to closing any gaps in opportunity that may exist, any gaps in access to the resources required to thriving as much as possible. But we're doing so from a shared understanding and experience of the thing that makes us most fulfilled, makes us feel most alive, those things about which we're most passionate, which the volunteer the deployment of volunteer energy, it gets right to it. And so I see this strategic approach as a powerful way for us to get beyond some of the things that trip us up in the more conventional conversation around moralistic points of view for what's right and wrong. But it still pays attention to history, right? We're still focused on issues that matter and have a history, and we're saying this is how things have progressed over time, which is a major component of equity. However, in the way that you and the Lady Foundation in the way that I understand you approaching this work, allows a cross segment of individuals, across identities, right? We often in the racial equity spaces talk about intersectionality. You found an approach that allows for the most intersectionally diverse group of people to come together around a common passion.
Something outside themselves.
Something outside of themselves.
And if we come to whatever kind of community experience, whether it's a work experience or a Girl Scout troop or a church or the Olympics or whatever, if we come to it primarily with the focus on ourselves, then all those disparities, all those differences come to the surface, and we're sifting them through. How will this impact me, and do I agree with or not? But if there is that thing, whether it's a neighborhood park or whether it's a new website formed for an organization, or whether it's a food kitchen, food pantry, whatever it is that draws you from inside yourself to outside to come because of the care for other.
I love that.
Then that's what's going to allow you to see first the people that you're working with, see them first through the lens of your commonality